Hello, it's Reija and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my space opera September wrap-up. I read a total of 6 books this month and I managed to become an extraordinary space pirate. Unfortunately, I didn't get a dreadnought, but I still managed to finish with a reasonable amount of spacecraft in tow. So without further ado, let's get started and I'll tell you what I read. The first book I finished in September was Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, and this is a short novel written in 1961 and it is translated from Polish. I thought that the translation was very well done. I didn't feel at all a disconnect in the English language. I felt that the prose flowed really well and it didn't feel like I was reading a translated work, which was really good. The story is about this astronaut called Kelvin who embarks on a mission to this space station called Solaris, which is floating above this ocean planet, which is named Solaris, and the station is floating above it. And the ocean is sort of sentient. It is, the scientists on the station are trying to establish contact with the ocean, but the ocean is proving very fickle about it. And once Kelvin arrives on the station, he finds himself haunted by a person from his past who has been dead for a long time. And it's a very sort of psychological, cerebral thriller, but also delves in a kind of philosophy about what it means to be a scientist and what's the difference between scientific hubris and religious fanaticism. And it is very interesting. At times it was very heavy with the science, so I was a bit slow in reading it because I really needed to use the fullness of my brain capacity to understand things, and at times I needed to Google stuff up because I wasn't familiar with the concepts. But I really enjoyed this novel and I would recommend it. Some of the terminology is a bit, how should I put it, racially charged, but that didn't come across as malicious. It's more like this was written at a time when people weren't very sensitive about those things, or at least the author of this book probably wasn't. And yeah, I would really recommend it. I gave this 4 stars. The ending was a bit I think the ending was a bit of like a deflated balloon in a sense. Like I wanted some more impact, I wanted some more charge for the ending, and I didn't think that the book delivered very well on that. I think the ending just kind of fizzled out, and I think there could have been more to be done with it than the author did. But other than that, very good. I would recommend this especially if you are into thought exercises and sort of like philosophical reading. I would really recommend this. It is very introspective and it makes you really go into the main character's head. And it also poses an interesting question about what makes up a person, and is our view, is our memory, or our how we perceive another person to be, if that memory was used as a basis to create that person again, would that person be the same person as we knew them, you know? there are some really interesting concepts here that I think the book tackles very well. Just be prepared for a bit of a sort of open ending, but also a sort of no ending when you go into this. I gave it 4 stars, would recommend. And the next book I finished in September was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I read this book from the library, and it was a very good book to pick up after Solaris, which was really introspective and sort of cerebral. This is a very action-packed, compact story. It's a story about Murderbot, who is a security robot working for the survey team on a distant planet. And Murderbot would like nothing more than to just watch some series and consume media all day long, but those pesky survey team members keep getting themselves in trouble, so it actually has to do its job from time to time. I thought that this was very fun, very sort of energetic and interesting. It also has interesting concepts about humanity and what makes up a person. Can an AI be a person? But I don't think that it really delves too deep into those concepts because it reads more like an action romp. But I still thought that Murderbot was an engaging and interesting character, and I can't wait to pick up the rest of the novellas in this series, and I'm really excited about the novel that's coming out in the near future. I will say that because it is such a short work, sometimes it felt a little bit repetitive. I don't think that we needed to hear all the times, like how many times Murderbot wants to do nothing but watch the serials and such, because at times it really felt like that repetition kind of took me out of the story a bit, because it is such a short and compact work, you start to notice when those things pop up. But other than that, really enjoyable, really engaging, and I gave it 4 stars. And segueing into another story with an AI main character, I read The Ancillary Justice by Leckie. And I was really excited about this. It took me a little bit to get into it because this book kind of drops you into the world and doesn't explain anything. So you are really left with kind of pieces from a story, and you have to work to put it together. And I thought that this book did interesting things with gender. As a person whose native language is practically gender neutral, I felt that Leckie did some interesting things with the English language, trying to make it so that the main character's language is gender neutral. And Leckie did this by assigning she pronouns for everyone. Also, terms like daughter, mother, and sister are used interchangeably, whether the speaker is a man or a woman. And this is both really it's both very interesting and also kind of frustrating, because as a Finnish speaker, I'm used to picking up gender clues from context. For example, what word is used to describe the character? Is this character a sister? Is it a son? Is it a child? So that's sort of like words that are associated with one gender are used as gender clues. But in Leckie's case, the way she does it is that she doesn't give you any of those clues. So that made me not really understand some of the characters. Like, I didn't have a perspective on whether Seivarden is a man or a woman, or whether Lieutenant An is a man or a woman. And does it matter? No, I don't think it does. I don't think that it matters to me whether I know the gender of those characters, but it matters to me in a sense that I don't even know what those characters look like. They are kind of like watching someone through a frosted glass. I can see a shape and I can see maybe their skin color and their hair color, but I can't pick out any of the details, and because of that, the character kind of comes across as are removed from you. So even though I really liked the prose, I liked what Leckie was doing with these characters, I didn't feel fully connected to most of them. I felt that Seivarden was probably the most fully fleshed out character and had the best character arc out of all the characters. But I still found the book enjoyable, and I want to read the rest of the trilogy. And if the rest of the trilogy ends up being as engaging and wonderful as Ancillary Justice was, then I will probably purchase the whole thing. The book itself, the plot is basically a dual timeline, and it's following this AI character who is looking for justice and vengeance against a person for a thing you don't know in the beginning of the story, for what they are looking vengeance for, but it gets explained. The parts of the book are in like a present timeline, and parts are explaining what happened in the past and what caused this character to go on this path of vengeance. And it's, as far as storylines go, it is very much your standard revenge quest, but in terms of looking at imperialism and society and sort of like looking at humanity in general, I think the book does wonderful things with its theming. And I also think that the character of Breck, or One Esk, is very interestingly written, because you really feel like this character isn't fully human. I feel like the idea that this character is a computer construct comes across very well. So yeah, I gave Ancillary Justice 4 stars. After Ancillary Justice, I read A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers, and I loved this book. This is another story that deals with 2 separate timelines. We are following a sort of present timeline, and we are following the character of Sidra, who is a Lovelace artificial intelligence system that has been put into a body kit. And she basically has to deal with what it means to be an artificial intelligence in this sort of artificial body, and she has to pass as human because the body kits are illegal, and she can't be caught by any sort of law enforcement, because she will be destroyed if she does. And the other timeline is following Sidra's sort of guardian, unofficial guardian, Pepper, and how she was brought up by an AI and how she escaped this really desolate, awful planet that basically used her as slave labor when she was a child. And I really liked and loved this story. It is very human. Becky Chambers has this really casual way of writing these Wayfarer novels. They feel like easily digestible, easy and comforting reads, while at the same time they don't talk down to you, and there are some really complicated scientific concepts in here. I especially liked the Pepper chapters where her past is delved into, and I thought that Becky Chambers did very well establishing the different periods in her life and when she was a child and didn't have much of a language or a vocabulary, growing up into an obstinate teenager and then growing up into adulthood, and that sort of isolation of being the only living, breathing person in the near vicinity. I also did like Cidra's chapters, but those weren't as gripping for me. I did really like them, I wasn't skipping them or anything, but Pepper was the main star of the story for me. I ended up giving A Close and Common Orbit 5 stars. I enjoyed it even more than A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I liked that this was more focused on these two characters, and there was an overarching plot that was going forward in a chronological order, whereas Wayfarer is basically a kind of slice of life TV series, kind of like Modern Family in space, but this is more like an actual like drama, and it has some real heart to it, and it was such comforting, and like I felt good reading this. I felt happy. I devoured this in 2 days, and I am a slow reader that needs to take things at her own pace, so that I read this in 2 days is saying something. Highly recommend. This is probably my favorite book so far of the entire year. After A Closed Uncommon Orbit, I was on a Becky Chambers kick and I really needed to read some more of her work, so I read To Be Thought If Fortunate, which I recently bought in Dublin. And I read this in about 2 days also. I took my time, and reading this after A Closed and Common Orbit really put into perspective how Becky Chambers has evolved as an author, and also how different this is tonally from her Wayfarer books. This is much more grounded, this is much more science heavy, and it tells the story of this space crew who are a kind of survey team, and they go around various planets to basically observe and run experiments, but they try to have as little of an impact on the actual ecosystem of the planet itself. So what they do is they somaform their own bodies to fit the planets that they are visiting. So that means that on some planets they get like bigger muscle mass and bone density, and on other planets their skin becomes like reflective to combat the lack of light on that planet. And I thought that this was really interesting. I liked the scientific concepts here. I recommend reading the author note at the end, because Becky Chambers goes into detail about where she got the idea in the first place. This is also an ode to sort of crowdsourced, community-funded programs, which I found interesting as well. This is very diverse. The main character is either bi or pansexual, and she's in a sort of kind of polyamorous relationship. Sexual character in here, there's also a lesbian character and a trans main character. So the whole group in the Leckie program that is the focus of the story is very diverse, and I really like that. The ending has been very controversial. I know that some people have very much loved it and others have felt that it was a cop-out. For me, the ending was fine. It probably wasn't the best ending, but it got me thinking, and it sort of serves as a sort of thought exercise. Is it a satisfying ending for this story? Probably not, but to me it makes sense. It makes sense why Becky Chambers would write the ending this way, considering how the rest of the book is structured. I gave this 4 stars. It isn't a perfect book, especially not after A Closed and Common Orbit, but I really enjoyed it and I would definitely read it again. And the last book that I read in the month of September was The Electric State by Simone Stålenhag. This was recommended to me by Shannon from That's So Poe. I will leave her channel link down in the description. And I really liked the art in this. The art is phenomenal. I showed you bits of it in my previous vlog, which I will also link down, and I discussed this book with my partner a little bit because they also read it. And this is set in an alternative timeline in the 90s during a time where people have become sort of addicted to this Neurocaster network. They basically spend their entire lives in virtual reality. And the story follows this young woman called Michelle as she is traveling the desolate landscape with her robot companion and trying to make the most of it and avoid these people who are remotely operating various sorts of drones, and they are coming across her path. My criticism of this is that the story was a bit vague, and also that it felt to me that the story was sort of written after Simon Stålenhag drew those pictures. Like, he had this beautiful concept of various different sort of art flowing in his head, and then he drew them down, and then he realized that, oh, I probably should write a story. So it sometimes the story feels a bit disjointed and it doesn't always make sense with the pictures. But at the same time, I feel like the story is interesting. It definitely deals with heavy topics such as addiction. Michelle's past is riddled with tragedy, and her mother is basically used to work for the US military, who provided her with various kinds of drugs in order to remotely operate the army drones, and then she was let go and had to scavenge for those drugs by herself because the government wouldn't provide her with those anymore. So it deals with heavy topics like that, and also the other people in the system who use the Neurocasters and who Michelle comes across. Like, she is very sort of numbed to this reality where people are basically dying left and right and are emaciated in the desertscape just with their virtual headsets on. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was good in my opinion, but I don't think that I would reread it. I don't think the story has a lot of impact for like rereading. It doesn't have that sort of oomph that makes you want to go and check out all the various details. I think it is very much a one-time read. I actually probably would have preferred if this was just your regular art book, because then I would at least have the incentive to go and look at the pictures from time to time. But now that I know that it is linked so heavily to the story, I don't even feel the need to do that. So 3 stars, enjoyed it, but probably won't think about it much in the future. And there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read for September and for Space Opera September. Tell me in the comments, have you read any of these books? What did you think? Do you agree with me? Do you completely disagree with me on some of these? I would very much like to know. And if you participated in Space Opera September, tell me so in the comments. I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye bye!